Hi, my name's Emma. I'm the School and Youth Programs Manager at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art, and I'm here today to talk about daily rituals. So from Mason Curry's book, we've learned all about artists throughout history, their routines and habits, and today I want to focus on the habits related to sleep. Sleep is a really important part of our days, a really important part of our nights, and so as we look into the habits, routines, and schedules of artists, we can get insight into what makes creative people feel rested and ready to work. There are examples throughout this book that get us thinking about how sleep can really help your creative practice. For some people, that is really extreme. Buckminster Fuller was an architect and designer, and in this book they talk about how his experiments with high-frequency sleep, or sleeping for just a short 30-minute nap every 6 hours, helped him feel productive and would let him go on and be creative and lecture for hours on end. What rituals do you have around sleep? Maybe you have some kind of sleep hygiene habits about not having screen time before bed or not eating before bed that can help you feel balanced. Margaret Mead, an anthropologist, would wake up at 5 every single morning, and that helped her creative habits of being able to write 1,000 words before breakfast. I also loved learning about Haruki Murakami, the author, talking about how he would decline social events in the evenings because it was so important for him to get sleep between 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. each day. Whatever your daily rituals are around sleep, we'll hope that you'll think about how that helps you be creative, and join us next time for BIMA's Art in Action from home.
In this dream, I have a territorial view of my neighborhood. Not my current neighborhood, but rather a childhood spot in northern Wisconsin. I'm about 10 years old, and I've climbed one of the tall maple trees across the road from our cottage at 123 Arlington Drive. It's a relatively easy climb, and I feel secure, nestled into a comfortable crook of some branches. I'm pretty high up, and from time to time the tree sways in the breeze. I've never fallen, and I'm a safe climber. When you're little like me, reaching a branch to hold onto is sometimes a challenge, but I'm unafraid. Tree climbing is all about perspective. From my perch, I can see Mom hanging out the laundry, Dad getting the coals ready in the grill, my brother riding by on his bike, and our beagle asleep in the cool dirt next to his doghouse. Blackie, Brownie, White-Tip Coppel, our little dog with one crumpled ear. He was the runt of the litter and his ear got stepped on a lot, so it developed with some crinkles. It wasn't smooth and flat like his other ear. I'm sure Mom always knew I was up in the tree, but I never had the feeling that she was worried about me. Somehow she accepted my tomboy nature, except during those dreaded days at the end of summer when we returned home from the cottage and I had to go school clothes shopping with her. Now that was often a nightmare for me. However, if I was getting new PF flyers, that was different. I loved those tennis shoes. Anyway, here I am back in my maple tree, but now I'm staring into the eyes of a koala bear. And as I look around me, I see the maple is now a eucalyptus. I close my eyes and breathe in the aroma of the leaves, and I start singing a lullaby to the koala who is nestled in my arms. When I open my eyes, the koala is now a sack of apples, and I'm balancing on a branch in one of the 7 apple trees in our yard. These trees are not about the view. These trees are more practical, more about sustenance. I'm picking enough apples so that Grandma Sarah will bake an apple pie for my brother. One of the apples slips out of my hand and falls to the ground. And there is Blackie waiting for me to climb down. So that's what I do.
Most people spend 2/3 of their adult life recovering from childhood. It takes us that long to figure out what from our childhood was a truth and what was a bold-faced lie. I was once told if I held my breath long enough, I'd automatically begin breathing through my ears. And I tried it. Twice. My dad told me many times that the desert was really water, dried by the sun. He said if I was ever lost in the desert, all I had to do was squeeze the sand to turn it back into water. You have to be careful what you believe about the desert. Part of growing up. It was 1964, and I was 7 years old. Driving from Seattle, Washington to Los Alamos, New Mexico. My brother was pinching me. He was trying to get in the Guinness Book of World Records under the category longest continuous pinching of a sibling while sitting on your hands in the back seat of an International Harvester Travelall. He would have won easily if my sister had not been sitting on the other side of me, attempting the very same record.
I thought I told you to sit on your hands.
Yeah, Mom.
Sitting on your hands is not screaming.
This statement, likely intended to clarify an obvious misunderstanding, left me instead all the more confused. If sitting on your hands really meant no screaming, what did no screaming really mean? Had I somehow missed a critical linguistic signal early in my development?
You're in my space. And you're way over the line of my sight too. Move over.
At 3'9" and 42 pounds, I was not in the strongest position to argue. But as I was pressed back and forth, I noticed vast expanses on the far sides of both siblings, and I knew if I could just hop over one or the other of them, I could enjoy those unused acres of International Harvester seating.
Where are your hands? We are going to stop at the next pullout and drop you off.
But that's not fair. We were pinching him.
It's not up for discussion. We've heard enough of your rebellious clamoring to realize that no one else in the world should ever have to. Leaving one of you here is a small price to pay for world peace. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Goodbye. Bye.
My father revved the engine and sped away like a con leaving the scene of a crime, never turning back. And I sat on my hands, silent, hoping with all my might they wouldn't turn around before we reached New Mexico.
In the Montana landscape, when horses still ran wild and free, there emerged a tradition of women who matched their abilities to the size of the country and the broncs that populated the land. These are some of their stories. As young girls on the ranches, these women learned to break wild horses, harnessing the animal's untamed power to carry a saddle and rider. Later, they extended these ranching skills to their outstanding performances on the rodeo circuit.
In the first place, you can't be afraid of them. If you walked up to a bucking horse and you were scared of him, that horse knew it the minute you walked up in front of him. And I don't think I was ever afraid of a bucking horse in my life.
But with the saddle broncs, I just really enjoyed every bronc I got on. Just enjoyed riding them. In fact, almost every picture I have, I even looked silly, I guess, because I was grinning so.
If you didn't have nerve enough to get back on, you didn't have nerve enough to be a rider. Many of the horses that you'd get on would give you a real bad ride, and you'd think you didn't want to get on again. That was enough, you know, but if you're going to keep on doing that, you got to get on again.
Back when all of us was riding broncs, we were hardened in, really hardened in to doing it. And we'd have to have our tussle with a bucking horse every now and then. We knew what to expect.
An inspiration and teacher to this generation of riders was Montana's first woman rodeo champion, Fanny Sperry Steele. Born in 1887, Fanny grew up beneath the shadow of the sleeping giant mountain near Helena. Like those she later mentored, Fanny's career as a bronc rider began taming horses on the ranch. Fanny and her brother Walter gathered wild horses from the mountains behind the family homestead. In their foothills corral, the two taught themselves to rope, break, and ride wild horses. As teenagers, Fanny and her childhood friend Christine Sinnes donned racing silks like male jockeys to ride with the Montana Girls Relay Racing Team. At county fairs across the Midwest, they thrilled the crowds with their speed and daring. Stories of Fanny's skill as a bronc rider spread throughout Montana and beyond. In 1912, at the first Calgary Stampede, Fanny rode the killer bronc Red Wing and won the title of Lady Bucking Horse Champion of the World. Always riding slick with her stirrups untied, she won again the next year at Winnipeg. In 1913, Fanny married rodeo performer and producer Bill Steele. One of the rodeo luminaries of her day, Fanny performed at the first New York City Stampede, patronized by Teddy Roosevelt, and at Buffalo Bill Cody's Roundup in Chicago.
Fanny was a real horsewoman. What I mean, she wasn't no fake. When she was riding, she knew what she's doing. And so she told us that if we'd come over to her ranch, she'd teach us what she knew. Well, Fanny, first thing she taught you is to get out with your saddle horse and run in a bronc that you couldn't ride, and then ride that horse.
Well, I met Fanny Sperry Steele because of a rodeo outfit on the road through Montana and Wyoming and up in the North Country called Passing of the West. And in this show, my dad had a pack outfit. I used to watch her and see how she done things, because I wanted to do it just like she did. She was my hero, all right. I used to have stick horses I had tied up and pretend they were bucking horses for me. And a lot of things that I used to get a sawhorse and pretend that was a bucking horse and try to ride it. I must have had that in mind when I was very young. It was just something I grew up with. I wanted to be a cowgirl.
This is my Aunt Alice Greeno, and this is my Aunt Margie Greeno. They both used to ride bucking horses. Would you like their autograph?
At rodeos, we were known as the Riding Greenos. We started out, there was 5 of us, but Turk and Bill and Alice and I kept on. We rodeoed for over a period of 20 years or more, just anyway from 1929 through 54.
I still reward my father. I thought he's one of the greatest teachers we ever had.
Pack Saddle Ben Greeno won the first recorded bronc riding championship in Montana in 1898. Years later, he taught his children to break horses.
He'd go to the reservation and get a bunch of horses, maybe 50, 60 at a time. It's usually up to Frank and Turk and me to do that horse work and break them. And he'd say, this 5 bunches for you, this 5 bunches for you, and this 5 bunches for you. He usually had 3 of us breaking horses at a time. And he'd turn around, he'd tell each one of us, he said, now you break them or you walk. We didn't walk very often. I'd ridden horses that bucked around the ranch all my life. When they saddled one up in front of the grandstand, that didn't mean a thing to me. It's just riding another horse, really. And some of those old cowboys decided, well, why don't you give an exhibition of bronc riding? You can do it, can't you? And I said, yeah, I can do it. And they saddled him up and got me up on him, and I rode that doggone bucking horse for him. Well, I guess the people just tore the grandstand down. They hadn't seen a woman ride a bucking horse. And I was working in Red Lodge, and I was waiting tables. I was being a waitress. And I thought, well, I'm not going to be a waitress all my life. This one winter is enough for me. I read an ad in the Billboard magazine, and they were advertising for cowgirl bronc riders and trick riders for Wild West shows. So I sent a telegram, and the very next day, here come a telegram. Come at once. Come immediately. We had to go clear to Alex City, Alabama to join them out of their winter quarters. That was our first year in the rodeo business. We decided we was going to Red Lodge. We heard our hometown was having a rodeo. We went all the way from Alabama again by car, clear to Montana for the 4th of July. And they didn't have any acts hired, so I went to the ranch and got a horse that I could trick ride on. So actually I was trick riding, and I was riding broncs, and I was riding races. I was doing everything for them. And the people at Red Lodge liked it.
Deb Greeno lives here in Red Lodge, Montana. Come on now, Red Lodge! There you go now. The horse he wanted to get rid of, he's on to the ground. Now you tell him, Red Lodge,
We traveled all over the eastern states and down south and on up in the northern states too. I've ridden in every state in the United States but 3, and all over Canada during the war years.
And I traveled around at different rodeos where there were men's contests, and they'd say, well, sure, let her ride a bucking horse. There's only one girl here, and that's me. Give me a job, and when the boys would ride their saddle broncs, I'd ride one as an exhibition. I made a good living that way.
For Marg Brander, rodeo riding meant freedom to travel and work.
Well, I decided to ride rodeos, and I did because of the country we could see and get around. Had it not been for that, we wouldn't have seen much. As it was, we see all the western United States and part of Canada. We went as far up as Yorktown and Lethbridge and Wolf Point and Washington. Kalispell, and had contracts. Now, we had sure money when we went there, but not much, but sure. My father was a sawmill man, and of course my mother was just a young girl of 15. So we moved from lumber camp to lumber camp and had pretty hard times at some of them because in those days lumber wasn't worth nothing. And some good part of my life was brought up being hungry. When Violet and I were growing up, just finished school, we decided what we should do in life, and we was to not do women's work, because women's work was work that nobody got paid for, and all the hard work. So we decided that we'd do men's work, and we just went out to the hayfields. Then we got a job on the McGilvery Ranch and became good hands, so they hire us back and forth because we'd do a lot of things the men wouldn't think of doing, you know, like getting up at 4 and going out and bringing the horses in. So we broke horses. Yeah. We used to bring the wild horses. You have to go out and get them. It was a lot of work, and you had to have some good horses and want to ride. If you didn't want to ride, don't go, because it was lots of it. My sister Vi and I were just a year and 4 months apart, and so we decided we were twins and we'd do everything together, you know. And so when she wanted to rodeo ride, why, I went. And Kramer was putting his first rodeo on there, you know, in 31, I think it was. We had 11 there in Butte to ride out, you know. He had us all come out just like that, one right after the other. Kept old Doug pretty busy, hauling women off. But he called us a couple of big old ranch girls, which we weren't small, and that we knew how to ride, which of course I guess we did, or we wouldn't have stayed on. Regardless of how rough it was, we enjoyed it. And we didn't get much fame out of it, you know. We never did get to be famous or nothing.
Growing up in eastern Montana, Bobby Kramer's life has been horses, on the ranch and in the rodeo.
When I was a girl, they didn't think it was a woman's place to be riding a bucking horse or out there in the arena. They thought it was the wrong thing to be a-doing. And I was just one of those people, I didn't care what they thought. I did it anyway. It was my mother that thought I could do anything. And she encouraged me to do whatever I wanted to do. And so that gave me a feeling of shooting for the sky. You'd fall someplace in between. My mother, she was known as the most beautiful girl on the Redwater. And she rode her stepdad's racehorses. My dad, he was a cowboy that came up from Texas with a trail drive. They were married and moved to Prairie County, where my dad became sheriff after a few years. And then my mother and us 3 kids, we took care of the ranch. Then I did start rodeoing occasionally. My mother and I had a ranch up in Garfield County that I was the main horse hand there, and broke the young geldings. So I didn't travel like the Greeno girls did. I more or less ranched, put a ranch together. But I'd ride at Butte and Miles City and Billings and places around. But I didn't get on the road and go on the circuit. But my brother and the McMillan boys and myself, we all went down to their Wolf Point Stampede to take part in their rodeo. And the boys weren't having too good luck riding, and I wasn't having very good luck gambling, so I lost all the money. And Swede-Custer asked me if I'd ride one for exhibition. And said they'd give me $25 if I'd ride that horse. I said, I'll ride that horse. So this was a big gray horse. They called him Gray Wolf. He bucked out there, but he was my kind of bucking horse, and I could put on a ride that I was proud of.
All of the Montana women bronc riders rode for Leo Kramer. As Montana's Mr. Rodeo, he put on non-stop action-packed shows.
Leo Kramer was a real showman. He had good horses, and he took care of them.
And he was in the area of the country where all of the big, stout, good horses came from. And he had the best string of bucking horses of anybody in the business.
You ride for a famous string like Kramer, he's doing all right. And I don't remember ever getting thrown off of one of Kramer's horses, or his steers either.
But I worked for Leo Kramer for 12 years. Most of the time it was contest, and then other times it was just exhibition riding.
Every time I rode, I got moonshine. And he was a little stinker. He'd run out there and jump and kick, and you didn't know which direction he was going to turn. We fit in. We were a class of riders. It wasn't the gender. It was, we were all riders contesting. And when you've got a good sense of balance on a bucking horse, it's not as hard as it looks.
From Fort Worth, Texas.
You'd have to have a perfect balance. We call this, he's going up. He's got his feet, all 4 feet off the ground. My hand's back in the right place. My hand with the reins is in the right length away from his head. That's what we call with him. We're in perfect balance. They had a lot of girls hurt, all right. There's a lot of girls crippled. They'd either break an ankle or they'd break a hand, mostly break an arm.
That horse, before he came out of the chutes, he was fighting the chutes and he revved over backward with me. And he broke this wrist. So I just reached over and changed hands, but I was much stouter riding with the right hand. So actually it was a good thing for me.
That's how I got my ankle broke. I'd been riding all fall without hobbles. And I bucked off my last horse on the last show on the way to New York and broke my ankle. They used to advertise the cowgirls bronc riding contest. It would be a hobble stirrup contest, or this will be a slick contest.
Riding with hobble stirrups, you have a piece of leather or you can use a rope and you tie the stirrups under the horse's belly.
Every girl that I know, every single one of them, myself included, we just all you do is take a couple of little strings and tie your 2 stirrups under the horse. That's it. It wasn't tying yourself on or nothing, because you could buck out of there as fast as if you didn't have it.
9 out of 10 of the girls couldn't ride without hobbles anyway. They didn't have to ride horses like we did on the ranch.
Hobbles could also prevent escape from a dangerous ride. Among those who died riding with hobbles was Montana's Ma Gibson from Havre. Such deaths influenced the eventual demise of the women's bronc riding event. While both Greenough sisters rode throughout the U.S., Alice also performed abroad in England, Australia, and Spain. Alice and Margie competed annually at the women's saddle bronc finals back east, and often they ventured to ride the big bulls.
I wasn't afraid of the bucking horses at all. When it come bull riding time, boy, my heart would just go to jumping it. I thought, well, darn, if I can ride broncs, I can darn sure learn to ride bulls.
I worked the whole season in Spain with those bullfighters, and I bucked off one time all the time I was in Spain. Just one bull ever bucked me off. And I'd get off of that bull with blood all over my clothes and up in my face and all over my blouse and everything. So I finally told the manager of the bull rings I did not like that and I wouldn't ride if they were going to use those banderillas. He said, oh, we wait till you get off. Of course, New York and Boston were in the fall and the winter. I'd always drive to New York. There were 2 hotels around that we stayed at the Belvedere of the President. They were just across the street from the old garden.
Well, the biggest thrill I ever had in my life was the ride up out of that basement in this monstrous great big building filled with thousands of people. I think that wasn't something for a little country gal to see for the first time.
So I won Boston 33, 35, and 36. And then I won New York in 1940. It was only ridden for once after that. They always called me the Queen of the Gale Bronc Riders.
Afterward, Alice returned to Montana and ran the Greenough Ore Rodeo Company for 14 years. With little taste for big city rodeos, Marg and Vi Brander rode in the West.
The Deer Lodge rodeo outfit contracted we 6 to come in and advertise for the rodeo and do what we could to help it out. So we went in and rode in their parade. I rode the Roman race. You know, they had this fast team from California and they thought they had a winner wherever they went, and so they challenged somebody to ride to race them. So we had these 2 mares. She decided, well, she could do it. So we tied them together with ropes and stood up and took off and come in first by about 2 legs.
Marg and Vi, along with their 4 younger sisters, started their own dude ranch and rodeo.
Vi and I were working at the McGilvery place, and we took in some dudes and thought that's what we should do. So we got this little place over here and called it the Circle Star and decided to build it up into a dude ranch.
This was an all-girls team that did the building and the
cutting the logs and peeling the logs and setting the logs up and putting the floors and the roof on and doing the works. All women, no men around.
So in order to have some dudes come, you had to have something for them to enjoy, so we figured we'd put on a rodeo. First we'd have bronc riding with all the boys riding, and Vi and myself would ride. And then we had steer riding, and all of the girls would ride the steers and the boys too, you know. And then we had calf roping and barrel races and musical chairs. We have just about everything that you'd have at a big rodeo, only not so much of it. So we did that for about 6 years, and we had lots and lots of people. And we had lots of fun, and that's about all we had. You wouldn't go anywhere else and find one like it, so it was something different, you know, women in it all, doing it all. We were getting this for quite cheap money, and the rancher below us needed it quite bad, so he upped the ante and we couldn't go over it. So he got it, and we had to leave. So we took all of our stuff, all of our logs and all of our wires, and took them out of here and went off, then separated and went our own way. And I think that was the last, well, I think we rode one rodeo after that, Vi and I did.
Well, no, I never cracked up to be a buckaroo. I could ride a bucking horse, I could rope, and I knew how to run wild horses. I was as good as there was, knowing where those horses were going to go and how to handle them. The ranchers were trying to get rid of the horses, which was overrunning the country. And cattle were really expensive to buy. Bud had come back from the Army, and we were married at that time. So Bud and I decided we'd go into the horse gathering business. We gathered thousands of horses. That's the way the country was at that time. It was overrun with horses. There's a rancher, King Edwards, that was trying to build some fences down on the Hexby Point, but they had these about 100 head of wild horses that they couldn't handle, and Bud said to me, he said, do you think you could take that pinto mare and chase her around and get her in a spot where you could rope her? And I says, well, I'll give it a go. And this pinto mare was a legend in herself. She was just too fast and too smart for it. And there was one particular spot that she had to come past, and if I got there in time, I could rope her. But the night before, it had rained, and she was coming, running past, and I was running. And I hit this soft gumbo. Well, by the time I got out of there, I thought my rope was too short, but I throwed it anyway. And it just fit like a necktie. Just a little loop went down around her head and fit like a necktie. And that was one of the greatest thrills of my time, was when I roped that pinto mare. I felt sorry for her because she'd lost her freedom. And I just couldn't help but think, if she got out of that kraal, I'd be happy.
There'll come a day when there won't even be a wild horse no place. It might accidentally run across one somewhere on the reservation or out in the big country, but there won't be any herds of them anymore. That land's all taken up. I mean, it's all populated now.
The gathering of wild horses from the range brought an end to the challenges that formed this generation of Montana women bronc riders.
Well, I just felt like that's just an era, that's just something that's over. It's just, times are changing, that's it.
You know how it is when you're trying to remember your dream? It comes in bits and pieces, and in the retelling, everything morphs. But in my dreams, there is always a dog. So here it is. This is my dream. A dog in a rowboat on a lily pad-covered lake, rowing toward the shore. He stops to put on his sunglasses. And now I'm in the boat with him. A largemouth bass jumps. Then I'm reeling in the fish. The dog is barking. Then I'm underwater, swimming next to the fish. The fish looks at me with its big eyes. I say, "It's gonna be okay," and I unhook the lure. The fish spins around and swims away. I shout to the fish, "Blub, blub, 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 blub." My words turn to bubbles. Next thing you know, I'm floating up through a curtain of bubbles. So comforting. Then all of a sudden, the comfort turns to fear. Am I now part of a pod of orcas bubble feeding in Alaska? Thankfully, it's a fleeting thought, and I take another sip of my latte. I told this dream to my 95-year-old cousin Sadie. Sadie spent the next month creating an art piece that is rooted in nature. She found the pond. She found the dog. She found the sunglasses. She found the rowboat with oars. She found the empty hook on the fishing rod. All this imagery comes together on a canvas of lily pads. The lily pad canvas floats on the pond. But if you look carefully, you can see bubbles rising to the surface, which keeps the artwork in motion. This moving piece of art is on film, as this is Sadie's ultimate medium. She wants to capture the energy of things in motion, knowing that our molecules and the molecules of everything in the world are constantly in flux. Meet Ajax, Sadie's dog. Ajax watches Sadie's film over and over and over. The curtain of bubbles has become his obsession. And Ajax embarks, no pun intended, on his own art project. He sends out a notice to enlist his dog friends to be a part of it, and the response is overwhelming. The menagerie of dogs shows up at a local playfield. As they gather, Ajax shouts instructions over a bullhorn. The dogs listen. It's simple. Lie down and curl up. Make like a bubble. We are going to be bubbles for a good 10 minutes. This will be the most unique interpretation of bubble feeding the world has ever seen. Okay, begin. The dogs followed the instructions, and as the 10-minute mark approached, there was a loud snoring with bubble sounds. Every dog was in a deep sleep, and they were breathing as one. The drone of hundreds of dogs snoring as one rose up and made a connection to the universe beyond our planet. This sound was heard by the creatures from Saturn, creatures not unlike us, except for their very long ears and 3 eyes. It was the third eyes that received the message from the creation of Ajax, that we are all one. It doesn't matter how different we are, or for that matter, how many billion light years we are from one another. It's the motion of the molecules. So these Saturn creatures followed this sound to Earth because it pleased them so much. They arrived to see the dogs in their deep sleep, and they felt comfort. This comfort prompted them to leave all the beings on Earth with a gift. This gift was to open their third eyes. The Earth was changed forever, and all because of Ajax the dog. It's no wonder dog is God spelled backwards.
everyone. The next project I want to share with you is called Torn Paper Collage. And again, I find this a very fun art project, and it uses very easy to find household supplies like magazines, any kind of catalog, junk mail sometimes will work, and glue. So basically, what we're doing in this project is we're learning how to see color differently in our magazines. As we know, we oftentimes flip through magazines and we see these obvious colors of green and yellow and black. And one of the things I ask my students to do sometimes when I'm trying to get them to perceive something in a different way is to turn magazines upside down, because then our brain doesn't automatically identify the image, and instead we see shape and line and color in a different way. So what we're going to do is, there's two different options for this project. We can do it free form, where we just create some collage of either a self-portrait. This is one that I did of myself of small torn paper. Or I did a still life once of flowers in a vase with water, and you could choose, again, a sun, a star, anything that might have multiple colors to it. And basically what we'll do is we will just rip paper, you can't use scissors, but just rip paper and start creating your scene on a piece of background paper simply by gluing it down and creating the object through the use of the color of the magazine page. Another example that's really fun is to take a pre-made outline of a famous work of art. This is Van Gogh's Starry Night, and this is Claude Monet's Sunflowers, and this can be a little bit of an easier start on this project, where we take an already made outline and we kind of fill it in almost like paint by number. We're going to be filling it in with chips of color that we rip out from the catalog. So let's get started together. So this project is really based on a very old art form called Roman mosaics. And as you can see in these images, in Roman times, artists would take little pieces of tesserae, which were pieces of glass or ceramic, and use them to create a beautiful image. So what we're doing in this project is we're using found objects like magazine pages, and by color, we are ripping out little squares of paper. So right now I'm working on the green for the rolling hills. In order to make your final image look realistic, it's important to choose different shades of a single color. So when I went into my magazine, I was choosing light greens and dark greens, and even actual photographs of rolling hills or grass. Because as you can see here, when you glue them all together in a varied position and layout, you're going to get the overall effect of actual rolling hills. Again, this is about learning to see color differently and learning to use abstract shape to create realistic imagery. So now I am cutting out different chips of blue to create the sky. And I don't know if you are familiar with Van Gogh's Starry Night, but I'm not necessarily using the realistic colors from his painting. We are allowed to take as much creative license here as we want. Now that I have the rolling hills, the beautiful swirling sky, and the stars in, I'm going to focus on this form at the front. And I'm using dark shades of grays and blacks in the pieces I've chosen from the magazines. It's fun to use longer pieces to create that feeling of movement, combined with the smaller square chips of a more traditional Roman mosaic or tesserae form. And your hands can get kind of sticky, so it's good to stop every now and then and go and wash them off. As we work on this section, which is quite meditative in nature, I'm thinking forward to if I will do the houses of this or leave them blank for now. You can always come back to this project later because it is a more time-consuming project. And I think for this demo, we're going to leave it at this interesting form in the front of the painting and then move on to some other examples. I'm applying my last few chips of dark color, and it's always good to glue over the top as well. That can give it a bit of a glossy sheen. Now I'd like to show you a few different options that you can do with this torn paper collage technique. One of them is to use a pre-cut circle of any colored paper, and you can make basically a mandala out of colored paper. We've divided this circle into its various parts, and just with the different colors from the paper, I've created this really beautiful two-dimensional mandala, which can be easier than a big scene. And a lot of this work reminds us of Chuck Close, who is the American painter known around the globe for his hyper-photorealistic portraits of people. In his later years, he started using a technique where the underlying foundation of his painting was a grid, and he made tiny squares that made up each grid. Within each of these tiny squares, he painted some basic abstract shapes and colors. So when you look at his painting up very, very close, you just see what looks like abstract circles and squares of color. But when you move to a further distance from the painting, you see an illusion of a very realistic portrait. This is the same technique we can use here to get back to the Roman mosaic, where I've actually used a scissors to cut up square pieces like those ancient forms. And you create an image, again, using a pre-outlined template or a design of your own to create that illusion of a realistic piece of art.